You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Welcome to the 602 Club, Trek FM's local watering hole. I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and I'm so glad that she is here with me, coming at you live from Hawkins, Indiana. I guess this is the place that was formerly the Starcourt Mall, because not really so much a mall anymore, Christy. I'm sorry, the shopping here has really gone downhill since the incident.
It's gotten a little dirty.
The Gap isn't as nice anymore. Yeah, so although I hear the ice cream place is excellent, so.
Yeah, hey, Scoops Ahoy.
Excellent stuff. And we're so excited because back on the show to help us talk about Stranger Things is my co-host from Owl Post, the one and only Drea Coffman.
Hello! I feel like everything has
Hello.
a little bit of like a dusting of gunpowder, too. Like a bunch of fireworks got set off or something.
Yeah, it does feel like that. It really looks like somebody just threw a car through this place. So, yeah. Anyway, we're excited to be here to talk about Stranger Things Season 3. I hope everybody has gotten a chance to watch it by this point. We waited a few weeks, so everybody had a chance to binge to their heart's content. The return of, well, the Hawkins family. And so hope you got your coffee because we're ready for some contemplation. Before we get to our episode, talking through all of the episodes we watched, you can find us over on Twitter at TrekFM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. And you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. So the 602 Club is pretty much anywhere podcasts can be had. Best place to go if you want to leave us a star rating review too is over at iTunes or Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate everybody who's already given us reviews. So, if you like the show, help people find it. And by leaving the star rating review, that's what helps people find it. You can also find us online at Trek FM. We've got the listeners only We've got the listeners only discussion group there on Facebook. It's called the Babel Conference. You can get there two ways. One, type Babel into the search field there on Facebook. And that way you can get into the group and talk to all the different listeners from around the world. And you can go to the website at trek.fm, and any of our show pages that you'll see, there's a button that says discussion, and you can use that to get in as well. And last but not least, you can send us an email. Go to trek.fm/contact. Choose a show. Choose the 602 Club, and that comes to Christy and I. And last but not least, help us out with Patreon. If you like the network and like what we do here, go to patreon.com/TrekFM, and you can see how you can become part of the team and make sure all of the podcasts that we are doing here on the network keep coming to you each and every week. We'll have new podcasts that are going to be coming out soon, we've got more Star Trek shows that are going to be coming out. So if you were listening to any of the news we got at San Diego Comic-Con, we've got plenty that's going to be coming for you. If you were out listening to the news for San Diego Comic-Con, we have like 30 new Marvel movies we're going to be talking about for the next 40 years. So stay tuned. And there's just so much stuff happening here on Trek FM with the 602 Club and everything else. So again, if you would like to support the network and really make sure that this quality content keeps coming to you, again, go to patreon.com/TrekFM. Now, guys, ladies, I think that's the right term. Y'all.
I like y'all.
Yeah. So this season was really interesting because we kind of have... I was trying to figure out how to tackle the show because it's always interesting talking about this many episodes. But we have like a new old villain who's come back because the Mind Flayer that we got rid of last season is back to influence this season again. So he's gotten out of Will, which is great, but unfortunately he's trapped in our world now because they closed the gate to the Upside Down. And he's been working on a new plan to take over the world. He's like Pinky in the Brain, except he just looks like a big pinky brain, this monster he's created. So what did you guys kind of think about this as our like main threat? And did it kind of live up to, for you guys, to what we've gotten before for the last 2 seasons of Stranger Things?
So I felt like it actually exceeded what the monsters have done in the previous seasons to me because of just the sheer size. I mean, of course, like the Mind Flayer himself was huge in season 2, but I felt like the monster that he creates, first of all, is disgusting. And so that catches your attention. And then also just the size of it and the way that it works with being able to absorb people is so much different, and not just the possession of a host. It's that as well. So now it's not only the Mind Flayer they have to contend with, it's the Mind Flayer and his buddy.
Yeah, I thought it was a different sort of monster than we've had before, right? This one was much more, like in the past, they've always been kind of a known threat. Like you don't know what they look like, but you know it is what it is. And this one's different in that it kind of possesses the bodies of different people in town, or recreates the bodies of people in town. It's kind of hard to tell. Which you don't know then who is part of the Mind Flayer this time around. They kind of eased us into it last season, but this is a very different beast and a different way of being afraid of something. But yeah, it's super gross and super awesomely gross. They definitely didn't hold back on any of the ick this season. So for that, I definitely appreciated it. And it was difficult to beat, just like all of the other sort of upside down threats we faced. So that, I think that at least was consistent. It was a challenge to beat. It wasn't, just like all of the others, the Demigorgon, the Demigods, right?
It felt like Jabba the Hutt's uglier, gelatinous brother. Like
that has lots of limbs.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it really is one of the most disgusting things that they've ever created for this show. They really raised the nasty factor when it came to that.
But I think they've been working up to that. The first one was kind of gross. Last season was a little bit grosser, and now this one is like epic level of gross. But again, they eased you into it, right? We had the cat eating situation last season, which was pretty gross, and it was basically just a giant season of eating Muse. So. And
then Bob.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was pretty gross,
Bob.
too.
It's like, we had, it's interesting because the first season could be called Strange Things, and then the second season could be called Stranger Things, and this season could have been Strangest Things. And it's like you had gross, grosser, and grossest, like this was so far the grossest. And so, how did you guys feel about Billy then being kind of the main protagonist, I guess the main vehicle with which we were going to work out the Mind Flayer's plan?
Oh, it was perfect. I mean, it made sense because introducing him in the last season, he already comes across like a villain anyway. Like he's a little off kilter, he has a short temper, and he obviously has a history of being abused by his dad. So those things usually tend to promote the child to then have some issues as well, and sometimes become violent because that's all they've known. And so it made sense that then Billy is getting used by the Mind Flayer for evil as well. And I like that they gave him something to do and didn't just make it like he's just a bad seed. They have him being like this main character throughout this entire season now, rather than just Max's brother.
Yeah, I think it also helped in that his mannerisms and the things he did didn't seem out of character for the other characters. Like him being a creepy Mind Flayer puppet didn't seem weird to anybody else. And so it was harder to catch on, right? Because it's kind of what you would expect him to do. Be creepy, be out all night, hang out with random girls. Like that just is what his sister and sort of the society he was in had expected. So it made it even a little bit easier with that character. And I do like that he became a main character and had an actual sort of arc to him too, even as a possessed, bad guy, a possessed bag of gelatinous goo. Like we got a story arc for him. We got to learn more about him and why he was. I mean, we had an idea his dad beat him, but we didn't know the story behind his mom or why they left California or any of that. So I love that he kind of got a redeeming arc, even though, and you didn't have to like him to still hate him, which is a stretch to do for a bad guy.
And then that he completely turns around in the end.
Yeah, he had his turning moment, right? Which is always nice to see too.
And it's kind of interesting too, because I think the thing that they pick up so well is like everybody hates him as a character from season 2, and then they continue you wanting to hate him at the beginning of the season. I mean, he's definitely cuckoo, Mrs. Robinson.
That
all
was
over,
so gross. That was
the
grosser
Wheeler's
than
mom.
the big gelatinous pile of monster.
And so, but I mean, and I thought what was like so interesting about that whole storyline too is that it's very like realistic, like that's how that kind of thing can happen. So you're just predisposed to hate this guy, and I liked that the story uses him then as this, avatar of evil, and you buy it that he would almost be okay with this. But then it does that twist with him, and it gives you more of his backstory. But I like that never excuses Billy's behavior, towards people, or, like we're not saying, oh, it's okay then that Billy was like the way he is. No, and even he realizes, I think, his moment of self-sacrifice is almost his moment of trying to earn some kind of redemption for all of the evil he has been doing in his life. It's almost like he has a realization of like, I've been a huge douchebag my entire life, and I only have this one moment to try and save Elle and the rest of these kids. Like, this is the only time I'm going to be able to do it. Otherwise, I'm just going to die for nothing. And it does make you feel like he does die with more of a sense of purpose then. But it still doesn't make you hate him any less, really. It does make you feel slightly more sorry for him, for sure. But I felt like they just walk that line really well with him as a character, and kind of like I've heard too with a lot of Stephen King novels, he'll have the character who's just really bad, and he's always bad. He never changes really, and Billy kind of fills that role very well in the story, which makes sense because we know the Duffer Brothers love all things, the 80s, and like Stephen King, that's really where they get a lot of their inspiration for this stuff. So Billy just seems like the perfect, again, like, avatar for gelatinous evil.
Yeah, he's not the anti-hero, which I think a lot of stories nowadays kind of just default to this anti-hero, where it's like a hero you don't like at first or has flaws that ultimately proves to be a really good person deep down. Like, I don't think you ever believe Billy's a really good person. You just believe that there's kind of a reasoning behind how he became the way he became, and that doesn't necessarily make us like him or make him a good person. It just means like there is a story for what has happened here and how he became what he became. It's a series of bad decisions. So, I liked him as our bad guy because you felt something for him besides just hating him, which is hard to do.
Yeah, I think you couldn't have said it better, Drea. I felt all the same things, and especially that, like you're both saying, that he's not completely redeemed, that it doesn't make you go, oh, well, I like him now, but you at least kind of see what his background was.
Like, you don't want to dress your kid up for him as Halloween,
No.
but but you would get him as a character, but we're not looking for any Billy costumes this Halloween.
Yeah. I don't know. There are so many women out there that absolutely love Draco Malfoy and just think he's the bee's knees.
Yeah, but see,
when it comes to men.
He had a much more redeeming arc in the long run than Billy did. I mean, he was also much younger when all of the things that happened to Draco happened. Like, so you can kind of chalk that up to being a kid, right? I think Billy's past he's a kid and, came from a bad family, because Max turned out okay. So, I mean, I think it's a little different. But yes, I'm also sure out there are some huge Billy fans. I mean, clearly Mrs. Wheeler really was into Billy, knowing what she knew of him, which was still, I'm going back to ew.
Yeah. Well, just ew, because her makeup was so perfectly 80s and utterly disgusting all at the same time. So yes, way too much Mrs. Wheeler, way too much.
Way too much ew all around.
Just reel it back about 100 feet,
But I will say, it was understandable that a guy that age would think that somebody else's mom was attractive.
Nancy's mom, who's got it going on.
I read a really cool article where the actress who plays Karen Wheeler had kind of a say in the scene where she changes her mind. The scene where she comes downstairs and sees, Holly and Mr. Wheeler in the chair passed out. And originally it was just going to be Mr. Wheeler in the chair passed out. And she's like, knowing what she knows of the character and what we've created, she's like, that's not going to be enough, guys. Like, no one's going to buy that she sees her husband and is like, oh, my husband. So she convinced them to put Holly in the scene too, because really it's playing to her mom card. Like, you love your kids, even though this marriage is really hard. You're doing it for them. What is that going to do to them? It creates this whole different thought process that kind of goes through her mind and the kind of viewers' minds. And I loved the fact that, one, they let her kind of interject that. And two, I thought that scene was really touching. And that I do think that the kid was the convincing part of that, and not so much that she loves her super milquetoast, boring, neglectful husband. So.
Well, and I do want to give a little bit of defense to Mr. Wheeler in that situation, because I think it also was playing up to her realizing that he is a good dad, that as much flack as he gets, that he's there holding his daughter and the two of them asleep together. Like, that means that clearly she loves her dad. So they have a relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and I think more importantly, what I thought was so great about that scene is that so much of our culture loves to just romanticize affairs and say that they're wonderful and that they can help a person find themselves. And what we see here is Miss Wheeler actually choose to stay with her husband, choose to stay true to her vows, not just for herself, but for others that it would affect, like her family. And so the fact that this woman isn't necessarily super happy, but what I also really appreciated is that we also see her putting effort back into her marriage that she hasn't necessarily been putting in either. So we see in the show, it's like, this is a tango. This is a two-person dance, right? Marriage is about two people together, and both of them have not necessarily been doing all that they can for their marriage. But what we see her at the end of this season is really start to try again. They go to the fair as the family, her and their youngest daughter and her husband. They're experiencing things together. They're having fun again together. And she's definitely trying to kind of like ignite that firework back into their relationship and to their family relationship. And I thought that was something that was really neat. And so for this to kind of reaffirm that, family matters, like, and it's not just about you being happy. Like, that's kind of countercultural today, because most of the things that we watch these days seem to say, yeah, just go for it. Just go screw whoever you want, regardless of how it's going to impact your marriage, because all that matters is you being happy and fulfilled sexually.
Right. Well, we also see how it deepens her relationship with Nancy too, when later they kind of have this exchange and she basically tells her, you know what, I didn't have the opportunity in my time to go and be myself and be strong and brave and use my voice. And you should go do that. I absolutely think you should go do that. They have this really meaningful mother-daughter exchange that is very different from the last two seasons where we've seen her kind of chasing after Nancy and sort of being this like almost like superficial level mom, like, oh, it's okay, come talk to me, be nice, like now she's having a meaningful in-depth conversation and talking to her, her high school, or I think at this point Nancy's graduated high school or will be graduating high school, between something like that.
Yeah, her and Jonathan, I think, have graduated by this point. So
right, and having an adult to adult conversation, and that's a very different dynamic than we've ever seen with them. And it happens, I feel like, after she's sort of reinvigorated in her life and says, okay, I can't change that, but you know what I can do? I can empower Nancy to change her life. So I thought that was also pretty meaningful and a big moment for them. And you could just tell by the actress's face that this was not like, this isn't the mom I know, like intentional. So, it just all across the board, that decision really kind of empowered Mrs. Wheeler or Karen versus kind of just belittling her into like a sexual object, which was
yes,
good to see.
Yes.
Yeah. I was so glad that they didn't follow through with Billy and Mrs. Wheeler having a thing. And that the whole reason that Billy even gets interrupted is, to become the, pawn of the creature. But I like that she, like you were saying, Matt, makes that conscious choice of, you know what, I have some amazing things here that I should work on keeping, and I shouldn't just throw it away for one night with this, basically high school kid. I need to realize everything that I have and what I haven't been probably putting back into it. Although it does kind of make me laugh that it's like, yeah, they go out as a family without the other two kids.
Right. Half my family is missing, but it's a family outing.
Who cares?
Well, and I think, there's a big part of that too, where, she makes this decision that there's a whole other segment, I think, of our society where it's like we have idolized sexuality as if it's the only part of relationships that matter too. And I think what she realizes here is like she may never have the most firework sexual relationship with her husband, right? It just might not be there. But that doesn't mean that all of the other things about him aren't good. Like you said, Christy, he's a good father. Yeah. For the most part, you see that, he hasn't always been the best father, but he also provides for their family. He doesn't ever seem like he'd be the person to betray her either. Like there are things that are there that are good. And like, we sometimes get so used to our, we can just say it. We get so used to our spouses that we forget the good things about them because they become so mundane because we're just with them every day, and this situation reminds her of what's actually good there. So, who knew we were going to talk about Mrs. Wheeler for like 20 minutes?
Well, but when we talked about them going to the fair and Holly's there and Mr. Wheeler's there, but the rest of the kids are, they're MIA, whatever. I feel like that really speaks to like a culture, and that really speaks to the 80s. When you think back on super 80s movies, right? Like E.T. and stuff like that. There's just this different atmosphere where kids, once they're about 10, 11, 12, they just kind of go do their thing. Like they've got their whole other thing and they come back after dark, and as long as they're at a friend's house or at their house after dark, parents are good to go. And I think that's just one of those big things they capitalize on in this movie or in this show, in this series, when they start driving home all of these super 80s themes. One of them is like kind of the kids running free and no one really knows what they are, but everyone's fine and safe, which is shocking and Hawkins based on the fact that no one is ever safe in this town. But it's just like one of those little like 80s things, along with all of the other 80s horrific stuff they brought to the table this time around.
Yeah, I think, you bringing that up, obviously the show's always leaned on the 80s. But I think this season we really see that play out even more so. I think part of the horror aspect that we see in this show kind of references a lot of those like more disgusting 80s horror movies that started to come out, would be really popular. And, I also think the other villain in this season is when we're talking about the 80s, is the scare of the Russian threat, right? But here the Russian threat is not about their nuclear threat. They're trying to reopen the Upside Down and have literally opened Starcourt Mall so that they can use it as a cover for their base, which is below Starcourt Mall, and is where they are trying to reopen the Upside Down, which 11 had closed last season. So it's like they really are leaning into this idea of the 80s and the Red Scare. You know, we just didn't know how red the scare was. So
it was so that to me is the part that didn't work the most in this season, is the like there's a lot of little plot points in terms of bringing that many Russians to town and nobody noticing that, like, I didn't quite buy. Like, none of them speak English, but how do any of them go to the supermarket? Or where do they live that nobody noticed this weird concentration of Russians in this tiny town? Like, that to me is the part that's a little unbelievable, and I had a hard time getting behind.
You're just not supposed to ask questions, Drea. That's what it is.
Yeah. They were all on vacation.
They were getting Slurpees.
They were all getting cherry Slurpees.
yeah, I guess I didn't have too much of a problem with that because it just fits in so much with the 80s motif of like these type of things happening in small town America, and like it just seems so classic. But I love though that on top of the Russians being this threat, you know, we really do kind of dive into mall culture and, you know, the death of main streets, because big malls had opened up and all the smaller stores on all those old main streets starts to die because all the stores have moved to the mall, which is funny because nowadays, like growing up in Texas, like the city of Dallas and Fort Worth just keeps expanding. In the inner core, like, you'll start to lose, like, malls that used to exist there because now they've built brand new malls, like, 20 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
You have to drive 20 miles to the mall, but, you know, where the mall used to be was perfect because it was around the corner from, you know, so it's like we keep having these issues, but I just thought that was really smart to kind of, like, dive into this idea of let's go to the mall today. And it was, I mean, that's so the 80s. Like, I remember walking around the mall in the 80s with my parents, and like the Gap looked just like that.
Mm-hmm. Or you would go get a corn dog.
Yeah.
I remember movie theaters inside the mall, not near the mall.
Yes.
Like entrances in the mall. Yeah.
Or I spent a lot of time at the arcade. I loved all that in there.
Mm-hmm. I like the Pilates class or the jazzercise class. That was super 80s. That was amazing.
The boys just be like, their jaws hitting the floor as they watch the women.
Whoa.
There's been an awakening. Have you felt it?
But yeah, the 80s references never feel like they were too intentional. It feels like it's all natural, that it's things that you remember with the nostalgia for that time. And I like that they went with that route with the whole Russian scare that wasn't anything to do with missiles. That, you know, it completely just went the other direction. And it's that, no, it's back to sort of which one is going to be first to reopen the gate kind of thing. And I like the whole thing too of the kids stumbling upon it. That, you know, they just happen to hear a code, and then it goes into this whole thing of them going down an elevator into a secret base with
a secret Russian base.
Yeah, Operation Child Endangerment.
I love it.
And that's the thing that was so funny because, you know, I was just rewatching Kingdom of the Crystal Skull for something else, and it just reminded me, you know, the Russians were very interested in the supernatural, and so them tying all that together with this, it just kind of makes sense with everything that was going on in the 80s. So I think they do just a great job of, for the most part, of bringing this all together. You know, I do think one of the criticisms you could have is they could possibly have had one more episode to allow some of the stuff to breathe. And like Drea, you said, just kind of fill in a few more of the details. But I think for the most part, the storyline works mostly well. And it's definitely a more cohesive, coherent season than season 2 was, with the episode that shall not be named.
I thought that the clothing was the only part for me that was a little too 80s rific, like a little too on the nose. Like, I think, and it's not because the clothes were too 80 rific, but the transition from season 2 to season 3, and it was kind of a drastic wardrobe change for everyone. It was like we were kind of alluding to it could be set in the 80s for the first 2 seasons, and then all of a sudden in season 3 you're like, there is no doubt in my mind this is the 80s. And that was a little bit, to me, the only part that was maybe a little hammering over the head. Like we talked about, Mrs. Wheeler's makeup. Nancy's was kind of along those lines too. A couple places where just some of the stylistic choices could clearly changed from the previous episodes. Like you were supposed to really believe this is late 80s now. But other than that, most of the rest of the references were just as 80s rific as they had been, and subtle as they had been previously. I did really like that the 2 main kind of guest stars this season, big names that were brought on to take roles, were also really popular 80s actors. I feel like that you've got Carrie Eels from Princess Bride in 1987, and, Busey from Lethal Weapon in, 83, 84, something like that. So you will have 2 big names from 80s, and I like that they just kind of carried that through. You know them from the 80s, and now they're in this 80s thing. So I thought that was really kind of subtle and smart of the way they did that as well.
Yeah, I agree. And my favorite tie to the 80s culture as well was all of their constant through every season, the homages to Stephen King stuff. It definitely with this season, I feel like if people have not seen The Shining, that you missed out in that scene with the reporter chasing Nancy.
I feel like you didn't even have to see The Shining. You just had to have heard what it was and see some pop culture reference to The Shining to get that. Because I loved it. Because, yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, I loved it.
Come and play with us. I think, one of the things that was most interesting in this show was the fact that it was all about relationships. And all of the different relationships that are going on. And so there's lots of interplay between the different relationships that are happening. And most of them happen to be some kind of romantic relationships, but then you have the friendships. And so it's just like, there is so much going on. And, it was kind of hysterical to see Hopper and Joyce trying to figure the things out and having those classic, misunderstandings, and I loved him picking out the wildly wild shirt that looked like it came straight off a pair of Jams in the 80s. I remember those shirts. I thought that was really cute, and I will say too, it's not easy the older you get, and when you've had a lot of things happen to you to necessarily be able to let those go and get into a new relationship, so to me, it felt like it feels realistic for them to have been friends for so long and everything, and to try and move towards another phase it's not easy, so.
Well, and it makes sense, I think, because with her recently having lost Bob so horrifically, she had known both of them since high school. They made that clear in season 2. And so it's natural for Hopper to be the one to comfort her anyway. And then for it to possibly morph from there into a romantic love rather than just friend comforting a friend. So I felt like it worked in that sense. And then for the fact that Hopper as well had been through this journey of losing his daughter and then his marriage, and having to kind of come to grips with himself and become a better person before he was ready to be in a relationship again. So he and Joyce both had a long road till they got to this point, and then finally kind of realized that they care about each other more than just friends.
So if you've heard me on any of the other Stranger Things podcasts, you would know that Hopper has always been my favorite character. I have to completely disagree with all of this, because they created an alcoholic, abusive, controlling man this season. And that was my least favorite part. It was believable. I get how we got there. We've been laying the groundwork for it. But dear. Like he essentially tried to trick Joyce into dating him. He basically didn't trust Elle and threatened her boyfriend. He was essentially a high functioning alcoholic the entire season, which they had alluded to, but we actually got to see play out this time. I thought Hopper came off as extremely creepy and definitely an abusive person, which we didn't have context for in the 80s. That just kind of went unchecked. There was no one to sort of speak against that or stand up against that at that time. That was kind of swept under the rug. I did not like what they did with his character. I did not like how they tried to develop the relationship between him and Joyce. I agree. We laid the groundwork. It would have been nice if it sort of was naturally playing out, but I thought the way that they did it was forceful, and she had every right to not show up. She had every right to turn him down. She had every right to say all these things, and he was not respecting her boundaries. He was not respecting what she was telling him. And it should be okay for them to just stay non-romantic friends if she wasn't interested. And so a little bit of the journey, I think, was her getting interested, but in the whole of it, it just kind of came off as creepy. And I did not enjoy that aspect of Hopper. I did not like seeing how his character kind of came to a fruition, if you will. And he needed to give her space when she asked for space and not force himself into the situation when she wasn't ready. So I did not like Hopper, and I did not like how that relationship played out this season, which is a shame because he was always my favorite character for the longest time. So I'm just going to agree to disagree on this one. But I was not a Hopper fan this time around.
I am surprised to hear that, because that's not the vibe that I got. But I understand definitely too, where if you look at the scenes where like he's beating up on Alexei, I get that it was a frustrating situation, but then you feel like Hopper goes way too far when he grabs the guy's shirt and he's throwing him around the room. That does feel abusive for sure. And I guess maybe I excused a lot of the way Hopper acts with Joyce because I feel like he's trying to figure out how he feels about everything. But he did come to her for advice with the whole Elle thing, even if he didn't take it. And I felt like the scene with him and Mike was just him mirroring what I saw in my own dad when I started dating. Not that he was actually serious about doing anything to Mike, but that he was just being weird to freak Mike out on purpose and was never going to do anything about it. That's what
all that tells me is that he doesn't trust Elle and her decision making and her own ability to do that. And that, I mean, we can get into a whole feminist soapbox over here that I don't need to take it down, but I just feel like it's a toxic approach to relationships. It's a toxic approach to being a male, to being a dad and being a male parent. There's no need to threaten him. He could have had a conversation that said, "Hey, I want to see my daughter more. I miss my daughter." And he was uncomfortable to do that. And it does strike as something. I can see how it happened. I can see how it naturally progressed. I can see how that became a part of his personality and who they've created, but that doesn't mean that I necessarily thought it was the way it should have been handled or what I wanted to see in that character in the long run. I wanted to see more growth and not what I saw steps back.
Yeah, and I would argue that that's exactly what you see, but it's at the end. When when Elle is reading the letter, this season is a progression for Hopper. Like, he's learning to be a dad again. He's the dad of a girl who knows nothing. So no, he does not trust Elle because Elle doesn't know. And that's something that we actually show in this season, how Elle doesn't know anything other than... She doesn't know anything other than Hopper and Mike, and she needs more, she needs more than just that. And so we learned that this season. That's something that Hopper's learning this season. And so I don't think that all of the situations with him, or I don't think they glamorize it or anything. I think they're just showing a person who is in his own season of growth too, and that by the end he is a different man than he was at the beginning of the season,
right. And I agree that letter comes around, and that letter definitely shows like a different Hopper than we started with at the beginning of the season. But that doesn't mean that I thought the way he handled himself at the beginning of the season and the relationships and the way he developed those were cute. Like, I don't think they were appropriate.
Yeah, and I don't think I would call everything he did cute. I would just meaning I felt like the overall I'm not as hard on him as you're being. So I just fair. Think I just think he's and part of one of the things that this show is very good at is that like it doesn't cover up the sins of the characters, you know? Like it shows them who they are and how they need to grow, and Hopper's definitely one of them.
Well, we talked about earlier how Billy really wasn't an anti-hero, right? Like, we didn't like him ever, and we weren't ever meant to like him. I feel like Hopper is an anti-hero, and that you're not supposed to like a lot about him. He's supposed to have a flawed journey, but ultimately he comes through and does the thing that's right. He does the thing we want him to do. So I think if you have any anti-heroes here, that Hopper's going to be that anti-hero, especially seeing as he makes kind of the ultimate sacrifice at the end as well. So I didn't like the part of the journey we went through with him this time and how that played out. But you know, I agree that this was part of a journey. He wasn't meant to be perfect. But that I still don't personally like the relationship that we were kind of force fed between him and Joyce. I think Joyce is a strong, powerful woman, and I like that at the end we see her kind of take that and leave Hawkins. Spoilers. No, I'm just kidding.
Right. Well, and I think that's the thing that I thought was the best about the season is that they don't get together, quote unquote, until the very, very end, right before he dies, where like he's...
Can we put dies in air quotes somehow?
Right.
Over voice only. He dies.
Disappears.
You know, and so, but I think that's the thing is like, what I really appreciate about the season is they didn't just force them together at the beginning of the season. Like there is this movement of them towards each other in this whole season. That's a rocky road to get there. But, and two, it's at the end, she asks him out. Like he's kind of like backed off and he's not ready for her to be like, hey, do you want to go have dinner? And he's the one being like, so is this like a date? Are we friends? You know, like he's completely come around in a different way. And I think that's a really cool part. I was really appreciative that at that moment at Murray's house with Hopper, that he was right.
Yes.
I get so tired of shows where the characters like they're going to do this and they're going to do this. And they did that a couple of times with the male characters in the season because they did it with Mike too, where he was worried about Elle, and he had every right to be worried about Elle because exactly what he feared was exactly what happened.
And that Max.
And so what I appreciated is it wasn't these guys trying to be macho or like overprotective. They're worried for good reasons, or they're using what they have as, you know, they're like Hopper's job is to read people and to do this for a living. And he knew exactly what was going to happen, and that's exactly what happened. And I really appreciated that.
I like that it took a second to get there, though. That you actually kind of thought he was wrong.
Yes.
Right? You see the car starting to pull out, like they got that far, and then he was right. I like that you kind of both sides won, right? Like they got you, but then Hopper was right.
Yeah. And it was one of those moments where it was kind of like, I think it was like a turning point for the character. Like that was one of those things where it's like something turned there for the character, and the rest of where they're going there, like Hopper starts to become, I think, a very different person after they leave Murray's. A lot of the experiences they've had have kind of, I think, formatted him into a different type of person. So it's just, I like all that. So we have so much more to talk about, and we've been talking for a long time, so a lot going on. I did want to just hit Elle and Mike real quick because I loved that they have this struggle, and like all the relationships in here are like so high school relationships. I've been working with the high school kids at the church, and this is exactly what it's like. It's like this same kind of drama all the time. But I loved their relationship because there is a purity to their relationship together. They don't go through a lot of the same drama that like Max and Lucas are doing. They don't get that because there's more of a purity to who they are as characters.
Oh my God, Max and Lucas just slayed me the entire time.
Yeah.
Like, it just killed me and I loved it.
So great. So great. But I just appreciated that really Mike does love Elle. And it's not just like, ooh, happy puppy dog love. Like, he truly loves her and he would give his life for her. And he worries about her because she's been the only person who can stop all these things, and he's worried about losing the person that he cares about the most. And it was really sweet, you know, and like for her to be able to come around and be able to see that because she's seen like a different side because of Max kind of helping to like educate her in the ways of the world, I guess you could say. Like all of that really worked for me. I thought that stuff was really, it's perfect high school relationship stuff. And, yeah, I love those two characters. They're just really great together.
Yeah, I loved that in particular with Mike, like you're hitting on, Matt. He's the one person besides maybe Hopper that truly cares about Elle's well-being and about what happens with her when she's trying to fight all of this stuff. And that the audience shouldn't forget that she's still just a kid, you know, that there's all this expected of her. And she's like 13 or something, you know, that's not fair. And it really hit me when Max wanted Elle to go in and do it again. And Mike says, hold on a minute, maybe that's not the best idea. And Max is trying to defend the situation and go, you need to trust her and know that she knows what she's doing. It's not an issue of trust. Mike trusts her. He just knows that there may be things that Elle is naive to and that could hurt her.
It's also a power level thing. I mean, you know, I think Mike is more worried about that.
That whole situation differently because I read it as more of an empowering thing. Like to me, Max was her lifeline to we talked about how like Hopper is worried about her because all she knows are Hopper and Mike. And so for me, I read Max as her lifeline to kind of everything else that's out there for kids her age, right? And all the other things she could do and be and live and see. And so for me, I saw that as her teaching her to be empowered and saying like, she is a person, she gets to decide her limits, she gets to know how far to take this. And she can hear that you care about her, but it's not up to you to decide whether she keeps going or not. That is her decision and her decision alone. And I agree, you know, that they're kind of all kids and no one should be having to deal with this, but it's kind of fallen upon them for, you know, the third time, because who knows how. I mean, we got it 7 times in Harry Potter. Why not 3 times here? So I always took it as it was about Mike learning a different way to be in a relationship than what he has seen his mom and dad be. And that his mom and dad represent a very traditional structure where dad, you know, sort of runs the household and makes the income, and mom kind of does the cooking and the cleaning and the child rearing. Like, this is a different dynamic than what Mike has ever really experienced. And for me, it was just about Max helping him to see that there are other ways to be in this relationship than what he already knows. And so I love, because and him accepting that and being kind of willing to try something new and try a different way to be in this relationship does just reinforce what we've been talking about of how much he really truly loves her, that he's willing to try something that's unfamiliar to him and a little bit scary in terms of the way he is in that relationship, which is really mature for kids their age. I mean, there's adults out there that can't do that. So, I thought it was just, they have a very mature relationship for their age, and it's probably for all the reasons we've been talking about, just based on the fact that like this is very unique circumstances for all of these characters, and they've all been through some pretty traumatic things already. So I think it falls into that category, and it has kind of allowed them to create a deeper relationship that has more meaning than maybe we would see in your traditional, you know, Lucas and Max, who crack you up, but their relationship's not very deep.
Yeah, I do think the thing that was the best about it is that, and this is, I don't think, what's interesting is that I think Mike and Max are worried about 2 different things. I think Max is assuming that Mike is coming at this from a level of like, trying to control, but that's not what he cares about at all. And what he does care about is exactly what happens, and you see that he had every right to be worried that this would happen to her and put her in even more danger than she's already in the first place. And so, and I think as much as I liked the Max and Elle storyline for a lot of things it does do for Elle, I do think that there's a misconception that just because somebody is trying to be protective of somebody, it is trying to be controlling. And, like, that's just not the way love works. Like, the best love is not one that's trying to control people. We all want to protect those that we love. It's not because we want to control them if we're doing it right. And so, I think... Max has her own issues, obviously. She's seen an abusive father, an abusive mother, and she's seen controlling behavior. So everybody's kind of coming at this with their own, like, preconceptions, and not everybody's completely right. But in the end, it turns out better for everyone. And part of that is just, like, I think with all of these relationships, we kind of see that life is better in community together. And that's really the thing that makes all of these people work better and be better people, is them in a community together. So Hopper and Joyce with Elle and Mike and Nancy and Jonathan and Dustin and Steve and Max and Lucas, they all help make each other actually better people being in this little community together. And they've all been rubbing off on each other and helping one another grow. And I think that's the thing that makes this show kind of special in that sense. It's like no character here is right all the time and or perfect. Like, they all have room to grow, and they all, and that's what we see in the season. And I think that's nice because it's much better than just kind of like having the show preach at you. And say, like, this one character is right. No character is right 100% of the time in Stranger Things, and that's exactly the way it should be in all shows, because otherwise, again, you're just kind of getting a show just preach at you, and that's boring, and nobody wants that. And I think they do a really good job of kind of mixing that up so that you see the nuance of life here, which is great.
And it's real. Like, there's no one person out there that's always right. We all know that person who thinks it's them. Surprise you. It's not true. But it's real. It makes the characters real. And that just adds to your desire to get to know them and relate to them and enjoy them, right? Is that they're real. So yeah, I totally agree.
Gosh, there's so many things, like so many people to talk about. I think probably, I would say, maybe one of the most interesting, we could talk about Nancy and Jonathan, but I mean, their relationship is very similar to what it was in season 2 in a lot of ways, and like, it's progressed and it's good, and I think they end up in a better place. But
I have one small thing to say about, and it's not even really about their relationship. It's about the fact that I really hope looking forward into season 4 that we find something for Jonathan to do, because
that'd be great.
The last 2 seasons, he really hasn't had an identity of his own. Everyone else has kind of had growth and character arcs and things like that. And Jonathan's been very milquetoast and kind of boring, even in his development of the relationship in Nancy in season 2, but the continuation of it. But yeah, he hasn't really had a role in the last 2 seasons. And so for me, that he fell flat again, and I didn't really care about his character this season because I didn't have a reason to care about his character. So I can leave it at that, but that's kind of, I just have some thoughts on Jonathan, and it's kind of like, a little wishy-washy here. So
yeah, no, I'd actually agree with you. I think, of the 2 of them, he's not the interesting one, and that's just because they really only give him this role of kind of like following Nancy around all the time, instead of having really any, like, usually it's not the case where the man has no agency of his own as a character. And so
besides him stabbing the one newspaper owner in the hospital, like, he literally doesn't do anything but drive a car and say, Nancy, Will, the whole season. Yeah.
So I do think, relationship wise, it was so cute, the relationship that built between Steve and Robin. I really thought that was an adorable relationship. I felt heartbroken for Steve that he found like this girl that was kind of perfect for him, and it turns out she's batting for the other team. I really felt for him because like he really has changed as a character so much. Like he's willing to be like open to people he would never be open to, and then she's just not into dudes, and that I felt so bad for him in that. And I love that he accepts it and like moves on, but I just felt for him as a character, like, oh, poor guy.
Well, and you feel for him because he poured his heart out to Nancy and like really loved her, and then she totally dumped him for the other guy. That all of that really hurt Steve, and then he finally got past it and realized that he could live his life and do whatever without her. And then he falls for somebody else, and then apparently she's into women, which is he, like you said, accepts it, but she tries to let him down easy, and it's sweet. It ends up being just like a really nice moment of her saying like, I do really care about you way more than I ever did before in high school. But it's just not going to be you and me together.
I agree. I was both heartbroken, and at the same time I thought it was just the sweetest like friendship that they grew. And I loved Robin. I think she's probably my favorite character this season, if we're being honest here. And I love at the end when he slides under the stall in the bathroom when they're both like super sick from the Russian drugs. I love that that when Dustin walks in and they're just both like covered in puke, like sitting on the floor laughing. Like I thought that was such a touching moment. And I love that it didn't get awkward and weird between them, and they could just kind of both move past it. And I don't really know, because I'm pretty young, and I think Chrissy's pretty young, and I'll give you're pretty young, Matt, what the acceptance rate of Robin's identity was back in the 80s, and how big of a risk she was actually taking in telling him this, because you could tell she had been wanting to kind of work up to that several episodes, right? We kind of got a hint that there was something, and then it turned out to not be what we expected. But I do love that he was very accepting and open about it and just kind of went with it. And I hope season 4 we get Steve Love. Maybe we need a hashtag like find Steve Love. Mm-hmm. Because yeah, he's now had his heart ripped out like twice that we've seen on screen. So, I do love Steve's character the more we get to know him and the more we get to see him. Especially at the end when he's asked to give his 3 favorite movies, and he legitimately cannot come up with 3 movies. Like, he can't think of any 3 movies in the moment. The one with the bears.
Yeah. And, that one where they go back in time, and of course, Animal House. Animal House, of course.
That's the only one he could think of in the moment was Animal House.
I'm surprised that, I don't know if Fast Times at Ridgemont High had come out, but I feel like Steve would love that movie just for the one scene, with Phoebe Cates.
I feel like he'd love The Breakfast Club if that had been out too. Like I could totally see him all over that.
Maybe. I mean, that's a pretty deep movie for Steve, though, I feel like. Mm-hmm. So I think, the thing that was, you mentioned age-wise, I do think, they do play a little bit loose with Robin opening up to Steve about her sexual identity in the 80s at this point. Because, I mean, I grew up in a pretty cosmopolitan place, Dallas, which has become a much larger community for the gay community. But I can tell you that's not something that I would have ever run into at that time period, probably. So they do play a little bit loose with that. But the fact that I think what it means, though, when you think of it in a context, it means that she truly trusts Steve. And like when you were saying, Christy, that she does love Steve. She just doesn't love him like that, And I thought that, it's a good role of like, it's a good showing of acceptance and care for people that are different, So that was great. Okay, so we've been talking for an hour, and we still haven't really covered the fact that this season happens in different groups. So I just wanted to ask you guys, we have the different groups, and so maybe we'll just kind of open it up as a question as to what your favorite groups were to follow this season.
Well, you can't spell America without Erica.
Thank you.
That is true.
And
that is true. I mean,
line-
she is the world's best capitalist.
Yes, I feel like that group was my favorite because that got into. I feel like that got into more of the like sci-fi stuff. Whereas I feel like Elle and them got a little more horror and then a lot of that kind of high school drama. So I feel like that group for me is where I'm going with.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you. I think, that having Dustin and Steve and Robin together and then adding Erica, and this is the thing I'd say about Erica, like Erica's probably the most annoying character on the planet in this show. And I don't think that I think that what they did with her was really smart, because for a while you could not figure out why do they keep having this obnoxious kid keep like showing up, and then the fact that they utilize her in the way that they do was perfect.
Oh, I love that she becomes a nerd.
Yes.
I love the whole dissecting of why My Little Pony is a nerd show.
Oh my gosh, that was the best.
It just brought me over the edge. Like, that was just the moment where I was like, Dustin, I love you, man. Like, he's already thought about this. He's got the whole argument constructed. Like, I did. I like, because at first you're right. She started out being the most annoying character of the season at the very beginning, right? And then as you slowly get to know her and some of that act, that bravado drops off a little bit, and you start to kind of really see her and know her, and she's talking back to the adults, and I just, she became a much better character than she started in the season. But I think that group's journey was my favorite journey, especially because I don't particularly like teenage dating angst. It's a little bit too much for me to handle. That's just not a part of my life I want to relive. So, seeing more of the sci-fi.
Who does, for the most part?
That's true. That's true. So I think seeing more of the sci-fi and the weird Russian base and just that whole, and keeping them in their sailors outfits the whole time just killed me,
oh my gosh, that was the best.
I just think that was my favorite grouping.
I was fascinated by that storyline too. And I just think it was kind of the most fun. Part of that because I felt like you became really invested in whether or not Steve and Robin would find their way towards each other. And there's nothing better than Steve and Dustin together. So I feel like they really learned their lesson in season 2, which is that Dustin and Steve need to be doing something together. And so them working that relationship. And then when you added Erica in that mix and Dustin started to deconstruct Erica, it was fantastic. Like you said, he realizes, oh, you like My Little Pony? Well, let me show you why that's the nerdiest thing you could like. And I love that Dustin understands all of My Little Pony. It means Dustin watched My Little Pony, which is hysterical. So,
which they admitted to in the show that he watched.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I did. I like that. I do. I think, we're supposed to hate Steve in season 1 here. They were not supposed to really keep him on board. That there's never a plan for that character. And the fact that it naturally kind of became one of the best characters on the show and has some of the best chemistry with Dustin. That, it really is just what made it wonderful.
So one thing I did want to mention that I thought was really interesting was watching Hopper and Joyce deal with the corrupt politician. And I thought that was really fascinating. Part of their group was to see Hopper kind of realize some of the things that have been going on in the town right under his nose. And to me, obviously, anytime you have Gary Oles playing a character, it's fantastic, and he's so good at being swarmy and slimy. But
his
that
accent
to me
was very good too.
Yes. But I liked that part of the Joyce Hopper. I mean that, and then of course when they go to Murray's and they have Alexi and all that was great too. But that part was really interesting to me, watching them, like, I don't know, just see the underbelly corruption of a politician. And I like there's the connection with the fact that he has these kind of underhanded deals getting the mall built, but then it also leads them, to the fact that, he doesn't really care that it's been the Russians. He's just trying to make money. And it just, all of that was interesting to me.
I thought that was one of those moments where they kind of played off each other's craziness a little bit, right? Like the little crazy they both have. They both,
Yes.
I mean, I feel like Joyce has a reputation for being crazy after everything that's happened in season 1, right? And this is kind of that moment where she like capitalized on it, you know, and that no one would not expect it from her because she's crazy, you know. I thought that was pretty great. It was interesting because I do feel like a little bit of that situation was kind of real to the world, that we, as our officials and our law enforcement, in this case with Hopper, are kind of willing to overlook a certain amount of corruption or not really chase a certain amount of the corruption until it sort of hits a point, right? So clearly Hopper had dealings with him before and knew he was a little bit slimy and marmy, and, you know, like that not everything was probably up to par, but he kind of turned a blind eye so far. And then when it sort of hit this point, then he's like, all right, I'm done. And I think that's a little bit real nowadays too, right? You're all willing to kind of overlook a certain amount of something until it hits a point, and then you kind of are no longer willing to look past it. And I feel like it kind of shows that, you know, he played the game a little bit. You know, Hopper played that political game a little bit to keep his job and to kind of keep people happy, and kind of just tells you a little bit about that journey we talked about him going on. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I don't know how in the 80s he thought the Russians were not going to be the bad guy. I don't understand how the mayor didn't see that coming or didn't care. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Same with sort of this 80s news team, right? The newspaper was very, very macho 80s man newspaper. That was very, very stereotypical and kind of along the same lines. And so I thought some of those relationships were really interesting and kind of worked out really well. And I really did like Joyce trying to talk to Alexei once they sort of kidnapped him.
That was funny.
And the whole situation with the car catching on fire and him like telling him to get out. And she's like, you almost caught me on fire, Hopper. And like the bickering there was pretty fun. But yeah, I think overall, you know, we have those groups sort of split up. But I think they came together a little bit faster in this season than they have in the past. You know, at least all the kids came together faster. The adults didn't really learn their lesson. They kind of stayed standoffish. For whatever reason, Hopper never learns his lesson to get back up, ever. Yeah, the kids definitely all came together and started working together as soon as they sort of realized there was a common thread. And I like that. I think that's how you defeat something, right?
Yep.
It's not lack of communication Hawkins anymore. So literally it's the opposite.
Yeah.
We have a radio tower this time.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's the thing that really works about this season in the end. And I guess before we wrap up with our ratings, we just want to let you know. Obviously, Christy was on the show and she was feeling sick, and so she needed to go ahead and leave, so she won't be with us for the rest of the episode. So definitely send her your thoughts and prayers there, and you can tweet her up on Twitter there at Bespin Bell and let her know that you're thinking of her, and you can get her ratings, and I'm sure she'll share those on the Babel conference once we load up the episode.
I'll just give you her ratings. They'll just be the same as mine, and then we can just call it a win. And then I can be right. I mean, I like being right. I'm that person.
Yes, you
really
do.
Earlier when I was talking to all those people, I was talking to myself.
Yes.
But yes.
No, I think, though, for me, the thing that I really liked about this season, just wrapping up and looking at our ratings, I felt like the show did a really good job this season of being very succinct. I do think, you know, they could have possibly added another episode and just like spread out some of the story a little bit. But I honestly kind of liked the season, just felt like it got to the point most of the time, and we didn't seem to languish anywhere. We didn't have an awful Elle episode where she went to some weird town we couldn't care less about, and, you know, none of that happened.
That they look like they stepped out of a Misfits album.
Yes. So all in all, I think this is a much better season than 2. I think 3 was right on target. The fact that they also switched up the way the villain worked, and Elle wasn't the key to defeating the villain in the way she had been before, was fantastic, because otherwise that just gets old. And, I honestly hope, I've read that season 4 is supposed to be the end, but they have an option for season 5. Just end it at 4, guys. Don't get greedy. Just end it at 4. Give us our happy ending, and we'll be good. But yeah, I'd say
one of the things we didn't even really talk about and address is the fact that Elle lost her powers seemingly.
Yeah,
at
least
end
right
of this
now.
season.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know what happened. We just know that she can't even reach the teddy bear on the top shelf of her closet anymore and can't pull it to her. So, that's kind of a big thing that happens right at the end of the season and leaves you wanting another season. And is that difference, in the past, Elle, she's disappeared, she's been exhausted, yada, yada, but this time she's still there, but now seemingly as a normal girl, which is kind of her first opportunity to have a normal life.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I really appreciate that part of the season too. Again, we're kind of switching things up, and we're making things a little bit more difficult then for ourselves when we get into the new season, because it's not just the same thing. So I'm very excited to see where we'll go, and I would say this is a great 4 out of 5 star season. Like this is 4 out of 5 Starcourt Mall stars. So, I really enjoyed the season. I thought it was well done, and I had a lot of fun watching it. And because they switched things up and shook things up, now I don't know what to expect from season 4, which is excellent.
Yeah, we have a couple cliffhangers, both in the show and outside of the show, that don't really tell you what to expect in season 4 quite the way we did maybe leading into season 3, where everything was kind of nicely buttoned up. And it could be anything. This is a little bit different. We have, this after credits or end of, it's a little bit like the Marvel mid and after credits scenes, right? Where we're in Russia and we have a Demogorgon eating people. But they also refer to somebody in a cell as the American. And we're not really sure what that means or who that is and who that could be. And then there was a really fun...
Is it Hopper?
It could be Hopper. There's also rumors that it's Dr. Brennan from the first one, that he didn't actually die. There's because in season 2 we hear the one aide say he's still alive. But so there's a kind of an interesting group that could be. But what's really interesting about this season is leading into season 4, Stranger Things did a really kind of cool 80s like interactive piece. So if you remember the episode where they're calling in the cavalry, and they're dialing the number and leaving the message, and Joyce calls back and basically threatens them. She also leaves a phone number. That phone number is live. You can call it, and there's a pre-recorded message from Murray, basically threatening a bunch of people, talking to his mom. And then one of the things he actually talks about is he talks to Joyce and says he has some information that he doesn't want to leave here, but they need to get in contact with each other. It's a lead or whatever. So it also gives you a little bit of hope of what's going on there, that Joyce hasn't completely given up on everything that's happened in Hawkins. And so that's so cool. And that's so, to me, very 80s, where it's like your cereal box plays along with the TV show, and your Pizza Hut toy plays along with this thing, and your McDonald's Happy Meal does
enhanced
this.
CD.
Enhanced DVDs and CDs that click links and stuff. It's so fun, that they did that and expanded it. And I think that just puts me over the edge, and it makes it, cherry Slurpee level of delicious for this episode or this season. I definitely don't think it's as good as season 1. It's miles ahead of season 2 for me. So yeah, 4 Starcourt Mall stars and a cherry Slurpee.
So maybe like 4 scoops of Scoops Ahoy.
Yes, and a little bit of whipped cream, but no chocolate sauce or anything like that. It's not perfect. It's not the perfect sundae, but it's a pretty delicious one. Like you wouldn't throw it away.
I mean,
it's not Erica eat it.
SS butterscotch, so. Right,
and you wouldn't let Erica eat it, but you would want to eat it. But it's not perfect, but it is so much better than, some garbage ice cream that you might get something else. Or it's so much better than just a single scoop of something.
Very
rum
true.
raisin. I don't know. I just offended half the people out there.
Yeah, you did. The pistachio fans,
Right. So I did enjoy it. I am looking forward to season 4. But I agree. Yeah, let's end it at 4. Wrap the story up. It's okay to know when you're done. I feel like season 5 would be just too much. Yeah.
100% agree with you. Well, I wanted to say just a huge thank you to our associate producers here, as we mentioned at the beginning, through Patreon, where you can support the network at patreon.com. Thank you to Ken Tripp, Davis Grayson, Ryan Millette, and Daniel Noah for being our associate producers here through Patreon. Really appreciate them supporting the network each and every week. So we encourage you to be like them and help out the show and the network at patreon.com/TrekFM. Drea, if anybody does want to catch up with you, maybe talk about some Stranger Things, I feel like this season is giferific in the sense that there are so many great gifts that you could make. So maybe people want to share their favorite, Stranger Things 3 gifts with you. Where can people find you?
Sure. You can find me on all the social medias. I am on Twitter at PCFChick and Instagram at Drea Coffman, and it's Coffman. And you can find me each and every week with the, dashing Matthew Rushing, over on the Nerd Party Network, talking about each chapter of Harry Potter, on the Owl Post. And we go chapter by chapter, and we are most of the way through book 5 at this point. But sharing our thoughts and feelings on the Potterverse. So that's mostly where you can find it. And occasionally I stop by Hawkins or wherever 602 Club happens to be convening, share my thoughts. I think I'm going to be joining y'all for some Frozen coming up. So
it's going to be great.
I'm so excited. I've seen that. I have that movie memorized. That's the joy of having an almost 2-year-old.
Good times.
But yeah, so that's where you can find me.
You can find Christy on Twitter at BestmanBell as well as Instagram, so please do look her up. She has a lot of other things that have been going on with her podcast-wise, and so those are great places to catch up with her. And then you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Vero under the name MattRushing02. I'm here on the network doing the Orb with Chris Jones, talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Apart from just doing Owl Post on the Nerd Party Network, I'm also doing Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, where we're talking about Star Wars each and every week. It is a lot of fun. In fact, just recently we talked about some of the surprises that we had watching Attack of the Clones back in the day. So we just kind of revisited that, which was great. And then you can find me doing Cinema Stories with my good friend Courtney as we talk about films, but through the lens of faith. And thank you so much for joining us. And y'all come back now, you hear?